Hi, welcome to Talkback. It's September 12th, and we're doing our continuing list of shows about the Colchester candidates running for office in the local election coming up this November 7th, right? And we have two candidates running for the Board of Finance. We're going to demystify, like a lot of people vote and they don't even know what Board of Finance does. So we're going to help you do that and introduce the two people on the Democratic ticket that are running. So let me say hello first to Karen Belding. Hi, Karen.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And you're running, this will be the first time running for political office?
This is my first time for any political office, yes.
We're going to review it. You've got a lot of experience and extensive background that makes you perfect for this new job, right? And the same thing for you, Scott Chapman.
Hi,
Scott.
how are you?
Hi. And you, too, have extensive experiences that will help you do the right thing on this finance board. We're going to unravel what that all is. So let's get started. Karen, give us an idea of your educational background, your background in the community in Colchester, when you got here, what you do, and why you're running.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I've been in Colchester for 14 years now with my husband and my daughters. And my background, I have a business degree and an MBA, so I've gone through all of the training on finance and accounting and all that fun. Right now, my day job is with one of the major insurance companies, and I run multi-million-dollar software implementation projects where I'm working with cross-functional teams and balancing budgets and getting things done, on a time frame. And then closer to home, I'm an avid volunteer in our community for years now. I've been on the board for baseball and the Colchester Baseball and Softball League. I'm actually the president for the last couple of years. And in addition to that, I'm involved with the soup kitchen, and I run the children's orchestra at St. Andrews. And so this is a natural transition for me after being very involved in the budget process this past year. To transition over to considering joining one of our political boards and volunteering in that way in our community.
Okay, and what is it that you have that you think will be meaningful as a contributing factor on the board when you get in?
I think just a natural inclination to want to understand how process is meant to work. That's what I do at my day job, is I break that down and figure out how to help people do their jobs better, and understanding, how best to make them efficient. And so I look at our budget process, right, and our financials in our town, and it's a complicated process. There's a number of boards and organizations and individuals who take part in it. But I feel like our community and our taxpayers as a whole don't necessarily understand how it's meant to work more efficiently than it is. I think there's a lot of frustration with how it's been playing out in recent years, but I think everyone struggles to really understand what should be working differently about it. And I want to help bring some of that transparency and help understand from the inside how it is working and what the real numbers are that people need to understand, and bring some of that transparency out to our typical taxpayers who should be able to understand it as well, so that they can have confidence when they're going to vote on a referendum.
Okay, great. All right, it's up to you now, Scott. Tell us about your background.
That's going to be a hard follow at that point in time. So my background, I've been in Colchester, Connecticut for the last 11 years. I've been in Eastern Connecticut for the last 25 years. Since I came off of active duty in the submarine fleet with the United States Navy. My educational background is I have a business degree, bachelor's degree with a double minor in economics and finance. As far as my professional skills that I bring to the table, I've been a financial planner for almost 20 years now. I've had my own practice for the last 11 years.
What exactly do you do in your practice?
The majority of what I do is actually investment portfolio management. So whether it be for individuals or businesses inside of our community and outside of the community. I'm an active member of the Colchester Business Association. I have just recently retired from the United States Navy in regards to anti-submarine warfare in that community, so I'm a recent retiree from the reserves in the Navy. And the reason why I'm running for the Board of Finance is not too far off what Karen was saying, is that there needs to be more of a consensus building opportunity that I feel is being lost right now. we do have this disconnect between the taxpayer paying their tax bills and not understanding what they're paying for. So I think if we can actually bridge that together, get the buy-in from our community, get them to understand that these things matter, to get to understand that you need to build schools, you need to build bridges, you need to build roads to get to and fro, you need to work on all of those things that actually build the infrastructure in our town. Where that money comes from, I think that would probably help significantly. So that would be a part of where at least I'm going to start and my background per se. So.
Okay, so let's, as I said, demystify what the Board of Finance is and does. So when people go to vote, they have some, I mean, we had a very raucous town meeting several weeks ago, right? Mm-hmm. And so many people's comments afterwards were, they didn't tell me anything, I didn't learn what was going on, I didn't know what happened. Let's see if you can help us with that. So Karen, what is the Board of Finance? How many members are there? What are the terms of office? Are you running for 2 years, 4 years? How does it work?
Sure, and I am new to the game, so if Scott has to correct me on something, go for it, my friend. But there are 6 members of the Board of Finance, and they're each 2-year session. So we run for a 6-year term. But each 2 years, there is a chair and a vice chair that's chosen that basically are in charge of facilitating the board and running the board. So this year, there are 2 members, or 2 seats, I'm sorry, that are up for election out of the 6.
Every 2 years, 2 people out of the 6 are elected.
Correct. So and it's a rotating which seats are up for election in a given election year. So that's why out of the 6 seats, 2 of them are up for election this year. The other 4 will stay in place until their seats are up.
And are you 2 running against 2 comparable people in the Republican Party?
We are. So the 2 seats that are up right now happen to be seats where there are Republican members in those seats right now. So one of the seats that's up is the current chairwoman, actually, Andrea Migliaccio's seat. She's running for re-election, and then Art Shalosky is actually stepping down from the seat that he's currently in. He's not rerunning. There's a newcomer running for that seat on the Republican ticket. So those are the 2 seats that are actually up for election in this cycle.
Now, of those 6, when is the chair elected? You just say every 2 years a chair and vice chair are elected?
So a new chair would be selected once the elections are completed and the new board is complete this year after the November 7th election.
And then, Scott, we talked about with Bernie the idea that even on the Board of Selectmen there was you could not have all Democrats or all Republicans on the 5-member Board of Selectmen. What is it like on the Board of Finance?
It's very, very similar. So you will have both party representation there, but obviously there's going to be a majority and there's going to be a minority. So in the case of this upcoming cycle, depending on how things work out, if there is a Republican majority, then they will be able to go and establish who their chair is going to be and their vice chair. And if there is a Democratic majority.
Well, you said 6. How many are on the board total?
So there are 6 on the board total. And one of those 6 members becomes the chair and the vice chair. So there are 6 members, 2 of which will hold those seats.
All right, so how do you get to be, are there ever times when there are 3 and 3, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats?
There could be in this cycle.
Okay, so it's not always that one party is in the majority.
No, but there's not always, but there is always representation from both parties. So there's never a chance where there's not going to be at least some representation from both.
There have to be at least 2 Democrats on each, or 2 Republicans on each term, right?
Correct.
Out of the 6.
Yeah.
But it could be 3 and 3.
Could.
But it can't be 6, 5 and 1. It has to be
Correct.
4 and 2.
Right. So for instance, right now there are 4 Republican members on the Board of Finance and 2 Democratic members. That's what's been in place for this past term. And now with 2 Republican seats being up for election, that could flip-flop, or it could be 1 and 1. We have to see what happens in November.
So you both can win? Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. Do you think that's clear? Everybody understands that?
It'll come down to the votes, which is what we're obviously trying to.
So if you're a Democrat and you go to the polls, you want to vote for both of you.
Yes.
Because there are 2 seats.
Particularly if we're looking to change we're the reason we're both running is because we want to change the tone and the way the Board of Finance in particular has been working in conjunction with some of the other,
Right.
for instance, the Board of Education. So yes, that's what we would ask. We would like to get a chance to see what the Democratic majority
Right.
could do on that
Right.
board
So
instead.
although your goal might be consensus and working together, we still live in this partisan environment, maybe too much so in Colchester lately.
Yeah.
And so you two need to get elected as a team, as part of the Democratic team.
Yes, we
Absolutely.
think
You need to get elected together. Okay, so now let's tell Scott, you start. What does the Board of Finance do in a town like Colchester with a selectman form of government and other boards associated with that?
So what the Board of Finance does is once they actually get the selectmen's budget and they actually get the education budget, they're presented with two budgets. They're limited in regards to how they can actually make adjustments to line items, whether to make changes as necessary. And a lot of it really just comes from listening to what the community's ask is. So that's where you see the board working together, saying, okay, where are there sensible changes that can be made to the budget? Do we need to have additions to the budget here? Do we need to have subtractions? Those are the areas where overall the board is responsible for making sure that they can make the adjustments to the budgets as they come in to make sure that they meet the needs of the community. So, and make sure that one, you are getting the items that need to be addressed in regards to the town.
So the Board of Finance makes the final decisions on prioritizing the budget items, whether to cut, whether to increase, and comes up with a final budget both for the Board of Selectmen's budget and the Board of Education, and then we'll talk about what happens after that. But let's clarify even further. So you're Bernie is now your Board of Selectmen, and is there a time frame when he has to present? What period of time during the year does the selectman have to present the budget to the Board of Finance? Say, these are our priorities. This is what we want. Here it is.
Yeah, this starts relatively early. I want to
Budget
say it
season
was
starts as early as February.
February
Okay.
and March, where
Okay.
so Bernie would work with his department heads and other folks in the town, right, to propose what they think is what they need in order to run the town, right, and that's how they'd build their proposed budget. On the other side of the coin, the superintendent works with the principals and folks at the schools, right, to understand and propose what it is they need to do their job, right? Those come before the Board of Finance in about that time frame, right, that February, March time frame. And then you're right, what the Finance Board is tasked with is really evaluating those and also keeping in mind the fiscal needs of the town in general, right? And this is where the taxpayers start to come into play too, because it's also keeping in mind what is it going to do to our mill rate, our tax rates, right? What about our bond ratings? And so they're looking at it from the perspective of, can we do these things, right? And then going back and working through workshops and things like that. If there are things where you're concerned that this number isn't appropriate or it's going to do things to our tax rate that, aren't the right moves for the town, then it goes back and forth. And there's a series of workshops and meetings that are held so that the town can have a say, citizens can have a say. And then it's really the combination of those groups that are meant to get together and figure out where can you find a compromise to find those right points.
All right, so let's just go back. In terms of the Board of Selectmen, you said Bernie, as first selectman, would meet with his board, and he would meet with all of the various departments, whether it's the highway or other things that are under his purview, is running the day-to-day running of the town, and they would come up with the budget. In terms of the Board of Education, the superintendent would give his recommendations to the Board of Education.
Yes.
They would then not necessarily take it in whole, but review that and decide what they would submit to the Board of Finance. Is that right?
Correct.
Yes.
All right. And then at some point there are hearings. The Board of Finance hearings are open to the public, where the public can see. Now, this isn't all done in a vacuum because there are budgets in place from last year that are ongoing, right?
Correct.
So we
It's
have
not a vacuum, correct.
So we have an idea what we spent last year,
Yep.
what our needs are now, and there's always that tug and pull and push as to, are needs going to be met without raising taxes, or do we have to raise taxes? And when we're in an environment where inflation is there, where the COVID monies are drying up, where a lot of the grants that we may have had are no longer there, we've got problems, and how to deal with them is what the Board of Finance must do.
There's always going to be that need to actually go and move the town forward while maintaining affordability. You know, that's ultimately going to be, you know, the every year struggle on the Board of Finance is how do we go and make sure that we are meeting the needs of the town while also making sure that we're making it affordable for the residents that live in the town.
Exactly.
So that's really, that's the balancing act. And that's also where I do believe that a lot of that comes down to making sure that you actually have a community that is engaged with their Board of Finance. So the Board of Finance shouldn't live in a vacuum. Right. You should have engagement from the community so that way you're getting across to them, you know, as far as members of the community, as far as taxpayers, this is why we're budgeting what we're budgeting. These are the needs. We understand that we want to maintain affordability, and then get their feedback back in, which is why we have town meetings, which is why we have the open formats for our boards of finance, which is why we have citizens' comments on both ends of every meeting to make sure that we are letting the citizens of the town tell us where they stand on everything.
Right.
So.
Right. So you mentioned in the beginning of your discussion that you had a lot of issues with what was happening this year. So what was it that was wrong in the way the process was undertaken this year that created a lot of turmoil, a lot of citizen discomfort, unrest, ignorance about what was happening? What happened, and how can you change that?
Right. So I was one of those parents that was in the room for all of those meetings through this past budget cycle. And to me, the most stark differential that I saw, and the reason I actually chose to run for the Board of Finance specifically, was just the difference in the way when you saw the Board of Education going through their cycle of public forums and workshops, and then you contrasted that with the Board of Finance's sessions and their piece that they played in the workshops. To me, there was a very stark difference in the way they approached, the way they were talking to citizens, the way they were providing information and sharing graphics and pulling up documents, where the Board of Ed was very transparent and had very clear, easy to follow documentation that they were bringing up live on the spot and showing you kind of how to read it and how to interpret it and how to see the answers to the questions that were being asked. And then we would go to the finance side, and those same kinds of things were, you know, the questions were attempted to be asked, and it felt like there was never a really clear answer when you were trying to get to, well, what are the numbers for this or that? And they would change from meeting to meeting, and there was no clear explanation of what happened in the background for those numbers to have kind of shifted and changed. And then just the attitude we felt from kind of between the boards themselves and from each board towards the citizens who were choosing to ask questions. And now, keep in mind, those questions were all over the map, right? Some positive, some negative to both boards. But what I found was the stark contrast of just the attitude of how they chose to handle those situations. And it really got me to thinking, and I wanted to take a stab at this and see if we couldn't bring some of that transparency and some of that cooperative nature and the ability to clearly articulate basic facts so that folks could be confident in what was happening in these decisions that were being made.
How about you, Scott? Same question.
I would say this. So the Board of Education, in regards to what they're presenting for a budget, they had some unique circumstances this year in which their ask had to be what their ask had to be. And I think what you saw on the Board of Education was both the Republicans and Democrats looking at their information objectively, trying to work with the town, presenting an ask that was clear and straightforward. And then what you saw on the Board of Finance, unfortunately, and this is also, I think, where Karen and I certainly, we were both running for the same reason, is that when you moved over to the Board of Finance and they were looking at the budgets, it seemed like it was no longer looking objectively at a budget. It became the budgets were a political cudgel. it was more about politics than it was about the actual practicalities of the numbers. And then furthermore, if you couple that with, basically, there's no lack of a better way of saying it, just a real disrespectful tone and tenor in regards to the community speaking out loudly. And I was actually very proud of how everything transpired in regards to the budget. It was just amazing to see the turnout from the town saying, no, we're not going to accept this. You're not going to go and do this to our education budget. You're not going to go and put our town in a place where you're going to hurt our schools. And just because of this unique set of circumstances in a given year. And it was disheartening to see that, you know, the Board of Finance in regards to their duties, it should be dynamic. It should be on a year-by-year basis, an assessment of what the needs are of the town. And it just seemed like the politics made them very stuck. And then they're choosing not to listen to the community. And the community spoke louder.
Yeah, okay. So another point, the community spoke in a way that was good for the Democratic Party, who supported a lot of those parents and people who came and had issues with that town meeting and with the Board of Education budget. So let me ask you this as a philosophical question, and we can get into specific issues. But you're running as Democrats.
Correct.
So when you're running as Democrats, what makes your democratic values inform the way you're going to handle issues on the Board of Finance? Because you know there's always that push-pull. It's so easy, if you're a Republican, to just say no more taxes, period. You know, isn't that the easiest thing in the world? And that's going to appeal to people. So again, as a Democrat, and we do have partisan elections, how is that going to inform your values about what to do when you're sitting on that board?
Absolutely. I think it is much more difficult as a Democrat. I think you nailed it, right? There isn't a simple tagline we can go to underline what it is we're going to bring to the table, right? But if I try to summarize it, I think particularly on this board, what it takes to be a good Democratic member is that you're able to, while we don't have line item authority into the budgets per se, you do have to understand the impact of the numbers that we would be giving to, let's say, back to a Board of Education and the superintendent, correct? And
what does it mean? Explain what it means. We don't have line item authority.
Yeah.
Explain that.
So when we were explaining before what the Board of Finance does versus what the Board of Ed and superintendent do, right? They go line item by line item and build a budget, right? What they need for every individual piece of what it's going to take to run the schools. When it goes to the Board of Finance, the Board of Finance can only make a decision around, will they accept the dollar value of that budget? Will they say we need to remove a certain amount of money from that budget? And then it goes back to the Board of Ed and the superintendent to follow through and figure out which line items get cut to make that number.
The superintendent and the boards have to prioritize on their own what items to potentially remove to satisfy what the Board of Finance is saying.
Correct. And that played out very viscerally this year, right? So the Board of Ed brought the budget to the Board of Finance. Board of Finance set what myself as one of the parents that was following it thought was too high a number to cut. Because the Board of Ed had done a great job, honestly, of laying out what the impacts were going to be. We've had multiple years now of very, very low increases to that budget, to the point where all the easy cuts had already been made. And they had laid out very clearly where they were going to have to go with cuts if the number was reduced. And the number that the Board of Finance decided to go back with to say needed to be cut from that budget meant a lot of those programs were going to be cut. Let me give you an example. One of the things that was on the table was full-day kindergarten. And if that had been what had passed, and that came to fruition, we would have been the only town in the state not to have full-day kindergarten. And that would have been tragic. So when I say the Board of Finance can't say, well, this is how you remove that money from the budget, right? They can only give the number back and say, we need you to remove this much. But when the Board of Ed has already laid out what cuts would mean to programs, I think it is part of the responsibility of the Board of Finance to understand what those impacts are going to be and go to some of those workshops, listen to the citizens about whether those impacts are really acceptable or not, while still balancing, is this, how will it affect
So as a Democrat, if you were on the board this time around, what would you have done differently?
I believe where we ended up eventually after the first referendum failed and they had to go back and figure it out, they finally took the proposal that our two current Democratic members had been proposing all along, which was a compromise, honestly. It got us most of the way to the number that the full Board of Finance had asked for, but it had given enough back to allow for certain programs to not have to be cut. Full day kindergarten, pay for play for band, a few other things. And that's where we actually ended up and successfully passed the referendum. They had been proposing that all along, and at least from what I was able to see in the public meetings, that was never really considered by the majority on the board. But we would have saved ourselves a full referendum. We would have been able to get tax bills out even sooner, perhaps even avoided what's going on with the senior center bonding had we been able to get the referendums done sooner.
So just summarize how your Democratic values would have made that difference on the board.
I think we would have found that compromise sooner. We would have taken the citizens' comments and the overwhelming sentiment sooner in the process, and therefore we would have ended up in the same place, but we would have done it a bit more efficiently and honestly with a bit more kindness.
Okay. Same question to you. How is being a Democrat, how does that inform you in terms of your work on the Board of Finance and the values you bring to that job in terms of, budget?
I think that a lot of times, the Democratic proposition is one. It's again, we're not looking to politicize our budgets. We're looking to bring a matter of common sense. I believe that you have to look at spending in budgets is that if you need to spend $1 today or not spend $1 today, you better understand what the long-term ramifications are. So if you choose to remove that $1 today, is that something that's going to end up costing you $10 in 2 years? So there has to be some common sense playing out, and I do believe that's what the Democrats really truly bring as far as a value proposition to the Board of Finance. Is not only a matter of, again, listening to the community, looking at everything objectively, but having a common sense way to actually approach the budgets that tries to remove the politicization of the budgets, but simply makes it a matter of practicality and functionality and affordability for the town, while making sure that we're bringing everyone along together.
So can you tell us what share of the total budget for the town belongs to the needs of the Board of Selectmen versus the Board of Education? How does that work?
So in the town of Colchester, where we sit right now, we do have the lion's share of our budget does go to our Board of Education. So I do believe right now it's roughly around a 70-30 split, leaning towards our Board of Education versus the municipal budget. That's not like that in every town, but this happens to represent the unique circumstances of Colchester in today's, place.
So that's not an estimate of about what other towns do about our size in terms of spending.
Well, if you go town by town, you sometimes see a little bit more of maybe a 50-50, 60-40. So, and that doesn't make that a bad thing. It just means that we're in a place right now where we do have the need for education. That dollar ask is that dollar ask right now. So it's not something where there's an attempt to skew one way or the other, or and obviously you have to be very, very careful in regards to your bond ratings to make sure you don't get too far out of the skew. But the needs are what the needs are, and I do believe that if you looked at what the Board of Education presented to the Board of Finance and presented to the town, it was a very straightforward, this is why we need what we need. And where I was very impressed by our Democratic members on the Board of Finance is that they were trying to bring practical solutions to the point where they said, okay, no, we need to add money back to the budget, and not only are we going to add money back to the budget, why don't we do so looking at the revenues more efficiently and then still find a way to not only put money back into our Board of Education, still lower the mill rate. And I think that's the Democrat proposition right there, where we really can stand out and drive our town forward.
Yeah. So is there also some long-term thinking, planning? So for example, I know it's always a balancing act, and you can not always afford the things that you want. So let's take the Board of Selectmen town budget first. What do you feel, as a potential member of the Board of Finance, is lacking? What does the town need in terms of roads, developments?
I would
that need to be thought through in terms of future budget allocations.
I think right now we are definitely at a crossroads, because we've had this, this influx of ARPA funds that, our current selectmen, our first selectman, has been able to rely upon. So when we look at the municipal budget, we are going to be looking at it from a completely different perspective. So we're going to have to be looking at our first selectman and our board of selectmen and say, okay, what are you doing in regards
the
to
ARPA funds? Explain, that was the money during COVID that
correct,
was
the American Rescue Plan.
granted to American Rescue Plan,
Correct.
granted to almost to everybody in the country.
So
but a one-time deal.
correct. So
Yeah.
and a lot of projects were completed in our town using those funds, but those funds are going away. So now we're going to have objective conversations with our first selectmen and say, what are your needs? How are we going to fund those needs through other means other than ARPA funds? We're going to have to start looking at grant writing. We're going to have to start looking at ways where we're going to pull money into the town through sources that have not been utilized as of late. So I think that is definitely going to be where the collaboration between the Board of Finance and our first selectmen are going to have to occur first and foremost. What do we have to work with in regards to money coming in? What do we have in regards to revenues coming in? And then how do we go and take those revenues and apply them to making sure that we have roads that are functional and drivable, that we have infrastructure that is workable, that we have, the basic aspect, a town is a community. A community, you want to have a green that, that everyone feels welcome on. You want to have fields where kids are safe in regards to being able to play sports on them. And right now, if we to a great degree, even with ARPA funds, haven't met those needs, what are we going to do going forward when we really, really are going to have to put our heads together to drive those needs for the town without this money?
I know I spoke to Bernie, running for first selectman, and he wants to concentrate on grant writing as a way to get funds for a lot of these projects that are necessary. So could you answer that question too, Karen? What are the priorities? What's lacking from the town that we need to work on in the future through the board?
Yeah. I honestly, the easiest way for me to make it make sense, right, is to think about it from the perspective of how do you run your house, right? You can have a budget at your house where you're just surviving, right, living paycheck to paycheck, but you're not able to put away for that emergency situation or, do the basic upkeep and things like that. And I feel like our town has been run that way for a little bit with our town budget where, in this budget cycle, for instance, it was promoted as a very good thing that the town budget was being brought in flat, that we weren't increasing it, that we weren't, allocating. And my concern there is, while I don't think we want to do large increases in the budget, I do think we need to be looking more closely at where do we need to be building in planning and strategy around. We do need to be doing more than just existing and surviving. Our roads are going to degrade if we're not able to proper funding in there. And I mean, honestly, for anybody who's been driving around town this summer, it's pretty clear that our public works is not able to keep up with the maintenance on the grounds and things like that. And I know a lot of those gentlemen, and they work very hard, which tells me one thing. We are not properly giving staffing and really looking at what does it take to do the jobs we expect these departments to do. And if we're out there applauding a budget that didn't add something into that department so that they could get their basic jobs done and make the citizens happy with what we're getting for those services, then there's something wrong there, and we need to look more closely at how can we make those small changes, or, to Scott's point, what grants can we write, or how can we redistribute things in order to help in those areas.
So I want to ask about another area. So we talk about grants writing, and then there's the tax base made up of properties owners, made up of whatever industries that we have, and that's another issue to talk about. but talk about the fact that some towns borrow money and there's bonding and borrowing. Explain what that is, Scott, and how that impacts new projects that you might undertake.
So obviously your larger projects in towns, such as our senior center and in the past our schools, those become bonding initiatives in regards to how we actually go and basically borrow money to fund these projects. So you've got two different ways to go about it. On your day-to-day budgets, on a yearly basis, you're going to have obviously the taxpayers, you're going to have our grand list in regards to our businesses, and that's where you bring in those revenues to support the daily budgets. In regards to infrastructure projects such as the senior center and in regards to our schools, then you have to look at bonding initiatives that are going to be able to bring in larger sums of money to actually fund those projects. And then actually past that, really it does become an ask out of town if we do need to actually get more funds to fund a project. And so another way to look at it is that we also, right now in the town of Colchester, we, at least as far as I'm aware of, we still haven't been able to actually complete our audit. So an incomplete audit means that we have bonding agencies that are looking at us and looking at our rating. I know right now we're on a watch list. If we go on a watch list, that means that it's the cost for us to borrow money to fund these projects go up. So there in itself lies a problem that if you actually get a Board of Finance working together with the first selectman, with the Board of Selectmen, and you actually are working as a cohesive unit, then we don't have bonding agencies looking at us, considering us on a watch list. We can get the funds we need to bond our projects in our town, and then at that point in time, we can get what we need to get done for the town.
So a couple issues along that. The senior center, what role does the Board of Finance still have in that? Kind of we're not done with it yet. We may need another referendum. What are your views on that?
So the Board of Finance in general plays a similar role, right? Any proposals for bonding or things like that would come through the Board of Finance. But at least my understanding now, I didn't sit in as many meetings related to the senior center as I did for both the town and the school budget. But my understanding is this has been on hold since essentially last fall, where we needed to move forward and there was a bonding necessary in order for that project to be fully funded and able to proceed. And at this point, we've reached there was an artificial tie made between we needed the town and the school budget to pass before they were going to consider putting that to referendum in order for it to be able to pass. And I think that is going to end up being detrimental for a number of reasons at this point. I mean, it's like if we had a poor credit score, right? Personally, we went to take out a car loan. You're going to pay more insurance because your credit score is lower, right? If our bond rating is now in question and we end up having to pay more in order to do that project because we have delayed it that way, well, then that's money we didn't have to spend as taxpayers on that project had it not been delayed in that way.
Yeah, got it. Any comment on that, Scott?
No, I think that Karen's actually very correct in that. So it's if we have any lags and delays in regards to getting the funding, certainly in a rising interest rate environment with inflation, then we are putting ourselves in unnecessary harm's way in regards to overall cost to complete the projects we need for our town.
So you mentioned the tax base. So economic development is an issue. How much more small businesses, industry, housing to bring into Colchester? What role does the Board of Finance play in that kind of development?
So that isn't the Board of Finance's primary directive, although clearly that does affect what we are able to drive as far as our budgets and our primary purpose, right? So Colchester's in a tough spot when it comes to that. We have our community is a desirable one, which is great. We want families to want to move here, right? But we don't have the amount of industry that we necessarily need for the amount of households in order for it to be able to work out tax base wise. You ideally want so much business and industry in order to be able to float your personal household side. And we just struggle to have a better complement there, right? But the Board of Finance doesn't directly control any of the strategies or policies around how those decisions are made that might affect that kind of ratio in the tax base, unless I'm off and there's
But
something
you have
you
a
know.
view on that, though? What is your view about the need or not of adding to the tax base by having more economic development? Is that something you wish Bernie Dendler, as first selectman, would work on?
I would absolutely hope so. I think that right now, if you take a look at our grand list in regards to businesses that are in town, you see one thing, you see not too many businesses in comparison to households. And furthermore, if you've looked at what's going on in Colchester, is that we have a lot of empty commercial space that's not being filled. And that's something that should be concerning to the whole entire town. Now imagine if we can get a first selectman that can build initiatives that actually will fill those commercial spaces, increasing our grand list, therefore offsetting the burden on the households in our community. So that is something that I think is a genuine ask that we're going to need out of a competent first selectman going forward with Bernie Dendler.
Right.
And if we can get that, if we can grow our grand list, that means that we actually have a greater pool of revenues to help the taxpayer not be so burdened, and we can continue to be the town that we are that draws in a greater community, and people want to come to our town because we can fund our schools properly, because we have great roads, because we have great fields, because we have a great green. So there's an awful lot that we plan on putting on the shoulders as a Board of Finance on our first selectman and our Board of Selectmen in regards to what are you going to do to make sure that we actually have a revenue and a budget picture that works for our town.
Right.
So that's where I do think more than anything we need to change the tone and tenor in regards to collaboration. We have isolated boards that are not working together. We have committees that don't talk to each other and meet regularly. And I think that if we can remove some of just the partisan politics from this and say we are all one Colchester, we all need to move forward and work together,
Right.
I do think that we can ultimately in time start filling up some of those commercial spaces, because businesses are going to want to come to this town because of what it is.
And then people are going to want to come here because of the education system. I mean, unfortunately, in Connecticut, it's the tax base of the property owners that fund the schools. So let me ask you the same question I asked about the selectmen's budget. What do you see are the needs of our educational system that are not being met in the budgets now that we hope to improve on in the future?
I would say if you start off right now, take a look what's happening over at Bacon Academy right now, where we have to let kids out of school because we don't even have the AC system working properly. So if we're letting children out of school because we can't even keep up the maintenance inside of the high school where you actually have air conditioning for the students because of this level of heat we have going on, that is a trickle down. That means that if you're somebody looking at our community as maybe the place you want to move to, and then you read in the paper that they're letting kids out of school because they can't keep them in there because we can't actually keep our air conditioning systems running.
Well, we're not the only system. There are plenty of
True,
places
true.
that close
But
down.
I think it's a perpetuating cycle
yeah.
where I don't think you can ever truly underestimate the importance of making sure that you have a strong education system and you have the buildings and the infrastructure to make sure that you can put kids through school and that you have teachers and that you have these programs in place. That's what drives people to these towns like ours.
Okay, your response on that.
I would expand on what Scott said. I fully agree. Going a little bit further, I do think that we need to make sure we're investing in expanding, programmatically. Things like at Bacon Academy, they have a great start on not just a college track for kids, but also other venues of kids who are interested in going more of a manufacturing route. And my daughter's currently taking manufacturing classes, and she has friends who are graduating with, many, many hours and a jump start on a career in more of a tech focus or more of a manufacturing kind of line. I think there's ways we can expand on that to really complement and help our students be able to kind of have routes to do more. Not that there's anything wrong with college. Abby's actually in line to go into engineering. But I think there should be other options. Not every student is going to want or need to take that track. Our schools need to complement that. In addition to that, I know that our schools are challenged every year with new state statutes and regulations about things that they need to have in place or change about their programs, oftentimes those are not coming with funding. They have to scramble to figure out how to be able to set those things up and meet the new state requirements. And we need to be able to support them in what they need in order to be able to continue to do that and be compliant, because otherwise our reputation as a town with a good educational system will certainly take a hit.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Before we close, I want to turn to a slideshow of the 2023 Colchester Democratic slate. There it is. So there's the whole slate with Bernie in the middle, running for first selectman. Let's keep going and show that. And there's Bernie in front of the library, open to all. Bernie again. Bernie and his husband with their dog. Bernie again. And Bernie with the other three, Dave and Denise on the right and Rosemary Coyle on the left, running for selectman to join him. There's Denise, Dave Koji, and Rosemary Coyle. And there they are in front of the library. Took a lot of great photos.
Yes.
There's Rosemary and Denise and Dave. And there they are in front of the museum. And there's our town clerk, very important position. Our tax collector, who you deal with, I guess, Michelle Wyatt. There they are. There they are in front of the museum. And we didn't talk about, we'll talk about that, the relationship between the treasurer and the Board of Finance. What is that? What happens? What does the treasurer do?
So the treasurer actually is the person who oversees how we actually go and utilize the purse. In other words, they're the person who's responsible for where we invest the actual funds we have to work with, whether it be through our banking systems and so on and so forth. It is one of the few paid positions in the town because it's rather extensive in the level of work, and in regards to Sean Gillespie, what he brings to the table is significant. His background is going to be quite complementary to filling the role, but you certainly need to be able to take the monies that you have on hand, or the purse, if we can use that term, and get some value for your dollar. So certainly in the times of increasing inflation, and everyone's pockets getting a little bit tighter, his job is going to be quite significant, and his collaboration with us and the Board of Finance, I do believe, is going to be more of a close-knit, element than we've ever had in the past. So.
Good. Okay, let's go on with the slides. Okay, there's Sean again, and there he is with Gail and Michelle. Now there you are, Karen, Board of Finance, and there you are, Scott. And there you are with the treasurer, candidate Sean. And now we have Board of Education, Chris Rivers, who's an incumbent, running again. Michelle, an incumbent, running. And newcomer Stephanie Tracy Kalash, Board of Education. And there they are with Bernie on the left, the first selectman, and in front of Bacon Academy, of course. And the last office is Board of Assessment Appeals, Krista and Andrew Canoia. Krista Cardis, there she is. And there's Andrew. And finally, the entire slate. And then there's Monica Egan, the Democratic Party chair, stuck herself in that photo. Okay. So just to let people know, the Board of Assessment Appeals, if I'm not happy with the assessment of my house, I can go to them and they can tell me that you're right, we're going to lower your value by 10,000, whatever, right? And that's what they do. You know how many appeals there are every year? Are there a lot? Or whenever there's a new
So
assessment?
I do think that there's definitely been more work for the Board of Assessment Appeals when we've seen the rise of vehicle taxes, just because the shortage of vehicles. So I definitely have heard feedback that there has been more attempts to appeal the value of vehicles. In regards to the recent assessment that this came through, yes, there were a lot of people that were looking at this increase in their property value and how that would impact their taxes, and it worked very differently in our community compared to any other community. So some people actually saw their assessed value decrease. Some people saw their assessed value increase for the first time in a very long period of time. So I do think that going forward, their role is going to be incredibly critical, because I do think that if you're not actually working with the people who have to end up paying taxes on their cars, on their homes, if they do feel that it's unjust, then they need to have their voices heard, and that's where you're going to see Andrew and Krista serve in that capacity.
Okay, interesting, good. Before we close, I want you to talk about how important it is that we elect Bernie Dendler as the first selectman, and what big difference that will make over what we have going on in our town today. Karen?
I honestly think the biggest difference that Bernie would bring to town hall is just understanding how a town hall is meant to be run, and understanding that a great leader isn't a great leader without a great team, and bringing that team together to work cohesively as a unit. And I think Bernie is so uniquely situated to do that with his experience working in the Lebanon Town Hall, doing that operations work for the first selectman there. He understands what a really efficient and successful town hall operation looks like and what it takes to run that. And I think if he could bring that to our town hall and bring that attitude and that vibrancy back into the way our town functions, that would benefit everyone.
Okay, Scott?
So since the first day Bernie and I met, we were working together in regards to, we ran for Board of Finance together, and we've pretty much been talking extensively every day ever since. I think he is going to bring a sense of calm and a sense of normal and a sense of decency back to our town hall. He's going to bring collaboration between Democrats and Republicans that is completely devoid of our town right now. And I think he's just going to bring just an overall sense of decency back to town hall, back to all the departments that make our town work. So over the years that I've gotten to know him, he's incredibly intelligent, he's competent, he's fun to be around in regards to the capacity where this is not always easy work, so sometimes you got to have some levity in the room. So I think he brings just that overall tenor and candor and perspective and intelligence that we really, really need for the CEO of our town to fill. And given the fact that he already acts in the capacity in municipality one town over, he's a lifelong resident of this town, he has served on boards and commissions, he is more than ready on day one just to hit the ground running and just get from campaigning to where we really need him, and that's governance.
Great.
And he'll do that on day one.
Okay, I have two more questions for you. The first is there any aspect of the work of a Board of Finance member that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about, that we've left out? Anything?
I think that the one aspect is that there's a lot of, they use the term caucusing or whatever you want to call it, but there is a lot of collaboration that takes place behind the scenes. And I don't think that it's talked about enough, where you have members on the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen and so on and so forth, where they're doing an awful lot of talking before they go and present themselves as a board. So I think that you can't put a price on the amount of work that any member running for any one of these boards. This is a voluntary position that you have to run for to serve this town. And I just think that, it's not that it's taken for granted. I just think that there's so much behind the scenes that, and this is one of the reasons why I am running, is I want that curtain pulled back for the town. I want them to understand the level of work that our boards put in to make sure we can serve our community.
Okay, anything else?
I would just say that I think we need to get back to where once Election Day is over, we need to forget which party we ran with, right, and work as a functioning, cohesive board, and then build connections with members on other boards and in other offices, right, and find a way to work together to move the town forward. And right now, I don't feel like that was necessarily happening, but I think that's a piece of what Scott's saying, right? Not just caucusing with those of your own party, but really connecting with everybody that's involved in working on these various boards and things, making those personal connections so that you're able to have that dialogue, right? And definitely not agreeing on everything per se, but finding the commonalities and the way to function in, somebody said it to me when I was talking about starting to run, but they're like, when a small town is being run well, nobody really knows what's happening because they can kind of ignore it. It's doing its job. We're getting what we need from it. It's kind of boring. I would love to see us get back to that. And the Board of Finance has their role to play in the way our budgets play out. And it includes those connections and those relationships that we as members of that board have to really facilitate in order to help that.
Okay. Now I'm going to give you the last word. What is it, briefly, that you would most want to say to the voter who wants to start? Scott.
You want me to start?
Whatever.
Go ahead.
That I want to say to the voter is that if elected, I look forward to being able to serve and work for the whole entire community of Colchester. I look forward to being able to get the buy-in of the whole entire community at large. I look forward to being a liaison to the whole town. I look forward to making sure that we can build a relationship and an understanding of what we do as a Board of Finance, where it's not an abstract term. It is an understanding of what we do, how we work, and how we plan on working for the town to make Colchester a better place to live.
Okay, Karen, last word.
Yeah, I would love to ask the voters to definitely pay attention to who is going to represent how they would want to think about these things, right? And I would ask that they have those conversations with their friends and loved ones and people they know in the community, to also talk about where we're at as a town, where we want to go, and which candidates are really saying the things that make the most sense to them and their sensibilities, and urge each other to pay attention and get involved, even if involved means going to vote. I'd love to see a ton more people hit the polls November 7th and consider voting for us so that we can see a title shift in the way the Board of Finance is playing its role in our town.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen Belding, Scott Chapman, running for Board of Finance. Please, everyone, vote on November 7th. We'll see you next time on Talkback. Bye.